Welcome back to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we are chatting about making the most of your commercial course as you get ready to prepare for the bar exam. Your bar exam hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox Podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about making the most out of your commercial bar review course. Well, first off, Lee, what can students really expect from one of the major commercial courses? What do you get?
Well, and we should probably highlight what we mean.
Right.
So we're talking about Barbary, Kaplan, Themis, the big programs that are kind of offering you one complete package. They're probably tabling at your schools. It's what everybody's taken in the past. This is kind of the historic way to study for the bar.
Right, the classic.
The classic way. Not cheap. Multiple thousands of dollars.
Right. It's not lots of information.
Lots of information. So pretty much the common thing between all of these programs is they have an abundance of audio lectures, oftentimes 12 to 15 hours a week, if not more.
Oh, that's a lot of lectures.
I know. Sometimes up to 20 hours a week. And the thing that a lot of people don't appreciate is these are not dynamic lectures. Even if you go to an in-person lecture, it is basically like listening to a recording. They are just presenting information. There is no dialogue. And so it is really passive listening of audio lectures. And this is a huge portion of the bar prep program. They will also oftentimes supplement those with some sort of exercises or some sort of way to kind of test yourself.
Are these like fill-in-the-blank handouts?
They can be fill-in-the-blank handouts. They can be online. I know that the different Barbary has an AMP program that they use. So, your bar review planner might have ways to kind of test your knowledge. So there might be some exercises as well. They're also going to assign you some practice questions. They're probably going to give you books or online access to past exam questions and outlines or sample answers for those questions. You may even turn in some questions for feedback. We'll talk to you about that in a little bit later. And then there's going to be MBE practice. They're going to have some sort of typically online tool, although they might also provide you with books with tons of MBE questions. You should ask your bar provider if they are real released questions or if they are made up questions by the bar companies. You will hear all sorts of different perspectives on that. We have shared some perspectives on our blog as well, but you should understand where those questions come from. The multiple choice is typically 50% of your grade. So that is not a part that you want to ignore. So I think that that's pretty much what...
Well, don't a lot of them also have books, outlines?
Some of them also give you,
in addition
physical
to the lectures.
books. Yeah. Some of them, it's like a huge box. It's very intimidating.
Yeah.
It's an abundance of information.
It's like telephone book stacks of stuff.
More information than you could ever really manage.
Well, and the other thing to consider too is typically these are done in an 8 to 10 week sprint.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's usually if you graduate in May, you oftentimes start right after graduation to get ready for the exam in July, and then depending on where kind of the holidays come, sometimes you'll start before kind of the winter holidays, but sometimes you will even study the beginning of January.
Right.
It depends on the year. So yeah, it's a lot. It's set up to be a full-time study job.
And they'll also kind of give you an outline of this is what you should be doing.
Yeah, they give you a study schedule of what you're supposed to be doing.
Which can be kind of crazy.
It can be an unrealistic study schedule for basically everyone. I think that the reality is when you're looking at these programs, you have to remember that they have picked whatever they've decided their, student is, and they have written this program to that student. And you may not be that student, and you need to be thoughtful about that. That student is not a foreign trained attorney. that student does not have learning differences. That student did not struggle academically, and so you want to think about that. But this is pretty much what you get in these kind of like out of the box you open up the box, this is the program that you get. And I think
you open up your iPad.
Or you open up your iPad or you open up your computer. But I think one of the things that you have to do is, think about whether or not these programs are going to be a good fit for you. And, because these programs table at your law schools, and this is what everybody's done years and years and years, everybody thinks like when you're a 1L, like sign up now, freeze in that rate and all that stuff. But you don't have to do that because, one, there are more options that there used to be, but you also need to have more information to decide if these programs are a good fit for you, and you will not know that when you're a 1L.
Right. Yeah, I think, and it's possible that there are bits and pieces of them that can be very useful for different individuals, but those pieces are unlikely to be the same pieces for everyone. So this is definitely a case where to make the most out of these, if you've signed up for them or if you're thinking about signing up, you really think about your learning style.
Yeah.
Are you a person who absorbs information effectively through audio or video lectures?
Yeah.
Like I knew, for example, that is not me.
Right.
I cannot sit in a room and listen to someone drone on about something for 4 to 8 hours a day or whatever it was. I was like, I will literally lose my mind.
Yeah.
And also it just didn't seem that efficient to me. I'm like, I'm a person who can sit down. Like I have a lot of focus for reading.
Yeah.
So I can sit down and like read an outline and deconstruct that material and teach myself that material. I just knew I would go completely insane if I had to sit through these lectures.
Yeah. And I think that another thing that people don't think about too is, maybe your learning style for learning something brand new is different than your learning style for reviewing something.
Right. Well, that was the other thing. I just thought, why would I sit through lectures on like all the first year topics that I already learned?
Right. If you never took in California community property, maybe it makes sense to listen to a community property lecture first. But if you got an A in real property, maybe it doesn't make sense to spend.
Right. If I was a Civ Pro TA, probably I don't need to be sitting through like Civ Pro 101.
Right. Or if you took a class on the performance exam, why are you spending time sitting in lectures about the performance exam? If your school had a class on the performance exam and you feel ready for that, maybe that's not the best use of your time. So you also not only just want to think about, your learning style, but you also want to evaluate, is it the same for everything?
Right. No, I think that's a very key point. You've got to kind of figure out what are your stronger and weaker areas, what do you know or not know, and then use the time available to you in the most efficient way possible because you just don't have enough time to learn like telephone book stacks of material, and it's also not necessary.
Yeah. So you also need to look at their study schedule and ask yourself, can I do this? Is this realistic? And you have to look at your life. I think most people need to be studying for the bar about 40 to 50 hours a week for the, 8 to 10 weeks. But maybe, you only have 30 hours a week.
Right.
Because you have kids and you're working part-time or you're working full-time and you only have 25 hours a week. Well, if you only have 25 hours a week to study, do not spend 20 of them listening to audio lectures.
No, that is a terrible idea.
That's a terrible idea. What if you're someone who, needs a lot of extra time to memorize material? Well, then the time that they're probably going to put on that study schedule is not going to work for you either.
Right. And I think I hear that a lot from people who didn't pass is that, when by the time they asked me to start memorizing, it was 2 weeks before the exam or something, and there was just literally no way I could possibly memorize all this. I now realize I should have started sooner.
Right.
So you want to look at that schedule in advance, and if there are any red flag things that jump out at you as like, oh, I really don't think that's a way that this is going to be for me, then you're allowed to change it.
Yeah.
Nobody's forcing you. You don't pass the bar, you don't get any extra points because you did everything on the study schedule. Like, this is the time for you to be a grown up and say, you know what? Like, I know from my own previous experience that I'm not great at memorizing things. I probably need to start sooner so I can do spaced repetition and like really get the stuff in my brain.
Yeah. I also think you want to be evaluating how it's going.
Oh, of course. Yeah, definitely.
And that,
that's the other problem is oftentimes it's a lot of like, do a lecture, watch a lecture for weeks and weeks and weeks, and there's not a lot of like, are you actually absorbing this and able to use it type of feedback and practice going on.
Right. And that's a problem because you don't want to figure out, let's say you're sitting for the July exam, 4th of July weekend, that things have not been going well.
Right. That you really have just kind of wasted the last month.
Right.
That's not a great position to be in.
No.
You know, like,
So I think setting aside, time each week to kind of audit yourself, it makes a lot of sense.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think you can do that even objectively, you know, with how many MBE questions are you getting wrong or right? Like, are your scores going up? Like, are your scores in certain areas going up? You know, we'll talk later about some tools to supplement some of these courses. They can give you this information pretty easily, but if not, you want to be tracking that.
Yeah.
Are there areas you're stronger and weaker in? Because, I mean, the reality is if you're missing a lot of MBE questions in a certain area, typically suggests you don't actually know the law.
Yeah, I think that's true.
That's why you missed them.
That's why I missed them. Yeah.
And oftentimes people are like, oh, but I hate this. I just hate real property. It's like, well, I'm sorry. That's 1/7 of the MBE. You probably need to get over that and just actually sit down and learn it.
Yeah. And
like, I'm sorry you don't like future interest. No one likes future interest. Like, we all had to learn that,
It's true. Yeah, you can't just opt out.
Yeah, you don't get to just be like, I just find con law really confusing. It's like, actually, the con law for the MBE, truthfully, is not that hard.
Yeah.
It's like you need to know like the levels of scrutiny. And if you know that, you've got like a large part of the con law down.
Yeah.
I think everyone can learn that.
Yeah. I just hear over and over and over again. We talk to, oh my gosh, hundreds of bar takers every season.
Yeah.
I can't
Easily.
even, it's probably not a good idea for me to count them because
it's a
it'll be
lot.
really overwhelming. But, I think if I had to pick the one common thing that I've heard from people who've failed, it was, I spent too much time
doing the lectures.
doing the lectures. Like,
Yep, everyone.
Almost everyone says that.
And or I got really overwhelmed with the schedule. I fell behind and I just kind of like gave up.
Yeah. And so, then I also think what happens is it's like everybody reflects and says they spent too much time learning the lectures. But when we work with first-time takers, we literally cannot convince them to abandon the lectures.
Yeah, they're like, but I won't know something. It's like, you need to write a practice question, but I haven't finished the lectures. It's like, stop talking to me about lectures.
Yeah.
Like, you have, 3 hours to sit down and like learn this material, and then you can do a practice question on it and we can see how it goes.
Yep.
I mean, I think, like you said earlier, if there are certain topics you just have absolutely no idea on and you find learning from lectures an effective learning style, then sure, go spend a few hours watching this topic on something you don't know anything about.
Right.
But it's just not the case that, most people sitting, except for some foreign trained attorneys, it's just not the case that you know nothing about these topics.
Right.
I mean, that's just not true. So, like, why do you need to sit through a lecture that's like, and then in these contracts, there's this thing called an offer. It's like, about offer and acceptance. Use your time elsewhere.
And most of those lectures actually aren't really teaching anything. They're just reviewing. They're just kind of like reading the outline and just kind of like reviewing it for you.
Yeah, I feel like you can read the outline way more efficiently.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why we have transcripts on our podcast. So if you don't want to listen to it, you can read it in about, I don't know, I can probably read a transcript of a 30-minute episode in maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Basically, maybe 10 if I'm really diving into it.
Yeah.
It's a lot faster to read.
It is. It is. I think the other thing you have to think about is, one, do you even like these lectures? But yeah, you're right. It's more efficient to read. Like, is this a good use of time? Are you retaining this information? Are you learning anything from these lectures? And just remembering, again, nobody knows how you study for the bar.
Yeah, you don't get any credit for just sitting there and listening to them. And the reality is, I think part of this comes down to what you were talking about earlier with, is the schedule realistic? I think the only way the schedule kind of quote unquote can be realistic is that it's doing a lot of these lower value, like kind of easier, more passive activities. Because the reality is you can't really focus for 10 hours a day.
No.
So if you ask somebody to do really focused work for 10 hours a day, like, you cannot sustain that. So the only way you can sustain this amount of hours is that they can't actually really be that engaging of your brain, because your brain can't function for that much.
Oh, this is my other favorite thing that people are really into doing now, because so many people are watching these lectures online.
Oh, double time.
That's not even in the script, guys. We just are like, we haven't recorded a podcast in a while, and like, we are just on today. Like, but
you just hear the same thing over and over. I mean, I can basically, when we talk to people and like, okay, what happened? How did you prepare? How did you feel? I'm like, as soon as they say, oh, I did this program, I'm like, okay. And then you found it was overwhelming and the lectures weren't really helpful and you fell behind and you didn't do any practice.
Yeah.
How'd you know that? You failed the bar. I mean, I know what happened here.
Yeah. But the double time, I mean, this is something where it's like, first of all, I I appreciate the desire for double time. I oftentimes listen to audiobooks at like 1.25 or something like that, because we talk pretty fast. I'm used to people talking fast, and it drives me crazy how slow people read audiobooks. But there is no way to really retain information at double time.
No, I feel like you're just at that point, like you want to check the box. Like I got through this lecture. Yeah. It's like, okay, congratulations.
So that was 90 minutes, 2 hours.
Yeah, you just spent 2 hours, you got through it, you get to check it off and move on with your life.
But
did you retain anything from
Could
it?
you talk to me about what was in that lecture? I think,
And also, like, couldn't you have just read like a short outline in like less time than that and probably gotten more out of it?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, if you are a diehard and you're like, no, I have to do these lectures, then finish the lecture and then go to your cat or your stuffed animal or your significant other or a friend and say, I just did listen to this 3-hour lecture. I'm going to tell you what I learned.
Right. And I mean, maybe I'll take some notes on a flashcard or on like a piece of paper.
Right. And if you can't do it, like repeat anything, stop. Just stop.
I mean, I think the key point, with any of these commercial courses, you have more than enough material than you need to pass the bar.
Yep.
They provided it to you in a variety of different formats, and you are allowed to use whatever format you want, and it does not matter. So, you're allowed to go off script. The people who made the schedule do not know that you tallied like wills and trusts.
Right.
And therefore probably don't need the 2 days that you've been assigned to study it, but that you've never seen some other topic.
Right.
So you need to take those 2 days that you would be doing wills and trusts, which you already know, and take it and apply it to something else that you don't know.
Yeah.
That's allowed.
That's allowed.
We're giving you permission. Right now, you can do that.
Right. Yeah, because you have to own this experience, and they're not customizing these programs to you. You hire us, we will build you a customized study schedule.
Right, and we will ask you these questions.
But that is not what's happening in these out-of-the-box programs, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're bad or they shouldn't be used. It's just a different product, and you have to be honest about what it is.
Yeah, and you have to use it effectively. You know, like you've got the material, now you take the material and put it together for yourself.
Yep.
I think they tend to underemphasize the MBE as well, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah, I think that they do too.
Because it's 50%.
It's 50%, and I think it's because it's really hard to teach people to do the MBE.
Yeah, and I think people don't want to do the practice. And again, the MBE, there are ways to do MBE practice that are more or less useful.
Right.
If you just sit and do 30 questions and then you kind of flip through and see, oh, okay, I got like 7 of them wrong. All right, I'll kind of glance at those questions. You're probably not getting as much out of that as you could be. So I think the way to think about this is for any hour that you're practicing or any hour that you're preparing, is this really a great use of my time?
Yeah.
And sometimes, like we said, you've got to mix it up. Some of it needs to be easier and like less compelling for your brain. Exactly. And some of it needs to be really focused. And the more that you can do like the focused practice, which is the other piece that tends to fall by the wayside here, typically the better you're going to be. Like I would rather have somebody spend 3 hours writing practice essays and really evaluating them and then take a break for the rest of the afternoon than just sit and mindlessly watch 6 hours of lectures.
So would I. Yeah.
I think that's going to move the needle forward, and you could still go to like your yoga class.
So let's we've talked about a lot of common problems. So let's just kind of sum these up for folks. So, the study schedule being overwhelming and the inflexibility of it and the fact that it's not customized to you. So you always have to, really make the study schedule work for you and abandon it, and if necessary, or tailor it to your own needs. You have to appreciate that they are not necessarily customizing this program to your learning style, and you need to kind of constantly evaluate the activities you're doing and whether or not they are high value. If they are not high value, I would, as we were just saying, like go to yoga and study less, but do high value items. That's more important. If you are someone who gets accommodations, especially some sort of extended time, that is not built in to a lot of these programs. And so if you, let's say, get a time and a half on the exam, you are typically going to take longer to do all of these exercises. And that does not mean that you should then study for 16 hours a day.
No, that's
feasible. That's the opposite of what you should do. But again, you're going to have to tailor this program to work for you or get some additional outside help. So, again, make sure that if you are someone with learning differences, that the program that's being offered is going to be able to be manipulated to get you what you need. Because I think the workload and the way that they're pushing you through things is not really too reflective of somebody who might have time and a half. Or,
right. I mean, I think in that scenario, you really got to be thinking about, do you use your final semester of law school to start doing some of this preparation work so you have extra time? Do you consider maybe taking, not the first bar when you graduate, but the next one? These are conversations you need to be having with yourself and with your trusted advisors about what's going to work for you, because this out of the box solution is almost certainly not going to be the solution that is going to get you to pass the bar.
Right. And actually, I think it was during our last accommodations podcast episode with Elizabeth Knox, who's on our team. She was mentioning that when she was studying for the bar, that she needs transcripts because she has a difficult time hearing, and like her bar review provider didn't have
I remember that.
accommodations that she needed. So she was like, well, you have to give them to me.
Are you familiar with the ADA?
Right, exactly. But it took time, and so it was still, and that's like a necessary stress, So she paved the way for people behind her, because they had to get it done, but she still had to go through that. So if you have very specific needs, you should talk to the sales reps at these bar companies and make sure they're going to be able to meet your needs quickly. So, because you don't need a battle in the middle of for the bar.
And like she was saying, in some cases with different products, the answer was yep, no problem. We can send that on over to you right now. And then in other cases, it wasn't the case.
Right. That's a problem.
So you want to probably be working with the people who are like, yep, not a problem. We can do that for you.
Yep. So one thing we mentioned earlier in the podcast was that, most of these programs do have you submit some sort of materials for feedback, usually essays and performance tests. What have we gotten some feedback on from people that we talked to about that feedback?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. Typically, it's not something someone spent a lot of time grading.
Right.
I mean, I kind of analogize it to basically someone's doing what the bar graders are doing, which is valuable to a certain extent. I think doing that practice and submitting it is a good exercise. I don't think necessarily relying too heavily on that feedback, which is not going to be very extensive, is really that great of an idea,
Yeah, and then you'll hear all sorts of crazy stuff. So one of my favorites, and somebody does this every single season, like at every single school, somebody submits one of the model answers or one of the student answers that the bar releases in California, and then they fail. And they're like, well, look, just to prove these graders wrong. And it's like, wow, that was a waste of your time. You learned nothing from that exercise. I think you have to take the feedback as it comes. Don't get super hung up on scores, because I think this is
the scores are very unrealistic.
The scores can be very unrealistic, and you have to appreciate that the scores in the moment on the test can vary. There's a whole separate discussion about whether or not the bar is a good idea, and the way that it's scored being graded by humans is a good idea. But, we see score reports where you have, two different graders read the same question and scores can vary.
Oh, a lot.
A lot.
I mean, I remember emailing you and being like, is it normal for people to these two graders to be off by 10 points? Doesn't it seem to question the validity of this test?
Yes. And I was like, yes.
You're
however,
but sometimes I see 15.
Yeah, exactly. So the reality is, if you, get a score from the grader from your bar program and you're like, this is crap, I don't want to, don't spend a lot of energy stressing about that. Take the feedback, question it, evaluate it, and then move on with your life.
Although I've actually often heard the opposite from people who end up failing, and often failing by quite a lot, is that I don't understand what happened. All of the feedback I was getting from my bar company told me that I was writing passing or better than passing essays, and then I get my answers in California and I got 50s across the board. Yeah,
I mean, I've heard it both ways. I think that it kind of depends, because I think there are other people who believe that it's the bar company's policy to fail as many people, to encourage them to keep studying.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've heard that too. I do think sometimes, though, what can play into that is then they had some sort of a bit of a meltdown in the exam room. So, if you're passing all of your questions and then you are failing the exam, sometimes it might be well, what did you have a panic attack? What, did you forget everything? All that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, or did you actually do these questions under realistic time conditions?
That's a good one, and not copying them out of the book.
Yeah. Well, or I feel like sometimes, did you really set a timer for that 1 hour limit? Do you have fatigue issues where you can do one question appropriately, but you can't do three, or you can't do, 2 plus the PT? All of these things factor into it. So certainly by the end of these courses, you want to be making sure that what you're doing for practice is as close as possible to what you're doing on the exam. Because it's like, okay, great. Well, if you can do a 1-hour essay and then go have a coffee break and like walk around the block and then come back and do some MBE questions. Like, sadly, that's not the way the bar works.
That's so true. Yeah. So you've got to be thoughtful about the feedback that you are getting. And if you need more in-depth feedback, you need to supplement your course, and that's okay. And we're going to talk about that next. But, when is this course not enough? Because I think this is a very important moment. So when you supplement, I think there are a few things you want to think about. One, are there holes in the program that you have that need to be filled by something else?
Right.
This is different than just having too much information and repetitive resources. I do not think that that's a good use of your time.
No, but I think, for example, one thing that can be missing for a lot of people is like very condensed version of these outlines.
Yep.
So something like Smart Bar Prep, for example, that is on the realm of something you might be able to memorize.
Right. Lean sheets.
Yeah, lean sheets. Even baressays.com in California has short outlines and things. If you don't feel like you either have or have time to make something that you can memorize, you got to get on that.
Yeah, because sometimes the bar outlines that you're getting with your commercial course are like 500 pages.
Yeah, you can't memorize that.
You can't memorize that.
This needs to be like on the realm of like, say, under 100 pages for the entire bar exam type of scale is what we're talking about.
Exactly. I think if you are struggling with the MBE, especially if your bar program does not provide real released questions, then you want to try out a program like Adapt-A-Bar, which we think does a really good job of, making sure that you are prepping for the MBE in the right way and seeing the right questions and things like that. So
yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to say, and they're not paying me to say this, that I really feel like almost everyone preparing for the bar really ought to have Adapt-A-Bar.
Yeah.
I mean, that was basically how I passed the bar. Like
Yeah.
I had an early sort of version of something that's similar to what became Adapt-A-Bar, but it was incredibly effective at pointing out the areas of the MBE that I was doing terribly on.
Yeah.
And that enabled me, in a short period of time to address those failings and turn that around and drastically increase my rate of accuracy on the MBE, which is definitely why I passed the exam.
Yeah.
So if you don't know which questions you're typically missing, you can't correct that.
Yeah.
So this is all about, correcting your weak areas as quickly as possible and then getting a realistic idea of how you're doing. So I just feel like, for the price point particularly, like given all the other money you're already spending on this, I feel like Adapt-A-Bar is almost a must-have. Mm-hmm. And it's in all of our programs. That's how strongly we feel about it.
Yeah, exactly.
We basically make people use it.
We do. I'll using like a tutor or using some supplemental programs that might be available through your law school. I would, first of all, if your law school is giving you feedback on writing assignments or doing workshops for you or things like that, not all law schools are doing this. If your law school is doing that, you should evaluate whether or not those are helpful for you, and you should engage as much because you've paid a lot of money. They want you to pass. Go for it.
Yeah, and I think in school, I know you taught in these programs, like people just don't necessarily take them seriously. And then in the summer, more and more schools are doing that type of extra work and extra feedback for their students too, and like take advantage of that.
Yeah, it's free. It's great.
And it's more customized than you're going to get just like, oh, I've got to watch this lecture. Don't have time to. I love that one. I didn't have time to submit, the weekly assignment that my school was willing to grade for me because I was too busy watching these lectures. Yeah. It's like, do you think that was a good choice?
Yeah. So I guess we can toot our own horn about our own programs. We do have on-demand programs we think that do help you do focused practice. That's our Writing of the Week program, helps you self-evaluate that practice. We also have our Practice of the Week, our POW program, which walks you through real released MBE questions to help you kind of learn and study. It's a different idea than Adapt-A-Bar, which is really focused on kind of adaptive practice. What we're trying to do is do more like, how do you do these questions, the strategies and techniques. So you may want to look into those. We think that those are ways that you can kind of plug some holes in some of these commercial bar prep courses for your individual needs. And then if you are someone who especially has unique needs, or you feel like that this is becoming a dumpster fire, that is, I think, when tutoring to help you triage. Pulling in an expert who knows more about this exam is going to help you try and salvage a program that you may not feel good about. And so, that's when you want to reach out to something that's customized to you to try and fix this problem.
Right. Because, I mean, we know what happens. We know how all this ends up.
Yeah, we know how this ends, and it's not going to be good.
It's like, do you want to talk to us before or after you fail the bar?
Yeah. Or if you have a complicated situation. I mean, we have students who are pregnant, who are struggling because they've got, different physical needs or health concerns, or as we've talked about, learning differences, like all of this stuff where you need to have some unique circumstances, worked in, or you've had a death in the family, or there's so many things and you're trying to regroup.
You're working. You've got stuff going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've I feel like at this point heard most of this before.
We've seen a lot of it. Yeah. Every now and then we get something new, but
pretty rarely.
Yeah, but pretty rarely. But our team is good at helping you triage and make the most of the time you have left. And that's what's really important. So, I think that sometimes you need to supplement and get external help. And again, it's hard because it's more money and this is such an expensive process, but failing the bar is so expensive.
Yeah. So I think, approaching these courses, understanding what they are, and then figuring out how you can make them work for you. Mm-hmm. And then if you find that they're not totally working for you, where can you fill those gaps?
Yeah.
So that you go into the exam feeling confident and not feeling like this is probably unlikely to go well.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, I feel like we've pretty much covered it all at this point.
I know.
Just don't watch the lectures to the exclusion of everything else.
I know.
That's my final thought.
Yeah. And don't believe, and I guess my final thought too is like how many people told me when I was studying, just do everything that Barbie tells you and then you'll pass. And
that's not true.
That's not true. For most people, that is not true.
Yeah, so it's like it works for some people. It doesn't work for other people. You've got the resources that you need. And if you don't have those resources, get other ones, because this is a very individualized process.
Yeah, don't take that
The only thing that matters is in the end, you get a passing score, and it does not matter what it required to get you there.
Yep, exactly. All right. I want to take a second to remind you can check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful hints to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or Alison at barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.